Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Deeper Learning MOOC. My name is Ryan Gallagher. I'm an instructor at High Tech High North County in San Diego. I just wanted to welcome everybody here and introduce quickly the Dlmooc team that will be working with you. This is our preview week focusing on academic mindsets, and we have a fantastic panel set up for everybody. On the bottom of the screen, you'll see some of the faces that you'll be interacting with over the next couple months. This is Laura McBain. She's part of our High Tech High GSE. You can give everybody a wave, Laura. And Karen Fassenpower, and she's part of K-12 Online. Our moderator for this evening is Rob Reardon. He is the president of the High Tech High GSE, and he'll be here to introduce the rest of our panel. So thank you, and I'll see you guys all at the end.
Thank you, Ryan. It's really a pleasure to be here. I am not an expert on mindsets, but we have a panel who are. So I'm approaching this evening with a growth mindset myself and expect to learn a whole lot, and I'm ready to do that. So we're going to get right to our panel. We'll first hear who they are, and then we'll get into a discussion of mindsets. Ed, why don't you start by introducing yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Rob. I'm Ed Briseño. I'm the CEO of Mindset Works, which was co-founded by Carol Dweck and others to help schools foster academic mindsets and effective learning strategies and habits in students through teacher training programs and curriculum that we provide through our website, mindsetworks.com.
Great. Thanks, Ed. Carissa?
I'm Carissa Romero, and I'm the Associate Director of the Project for Education Research That Scales, or PERTS, and we work with professors in education and psychology, both at Stanford University and other universities, to develop and test programs that instill adaptive academic mindsets in students.
Thanks, Carissa. And Camille?
Hi, I'm Camille Farrington. I'm a research associate at the University of Chicago and Consortium on Chicago School Research. And I'm involved in 3 different projects around mindsets. One is working with teachers to understand how to incorporate mindsets into their practice. A second one is measuring non-cognitive factors in the classroom, including academic mindsets. And the third one has to do with looking at broad literature around the importance of mindsets and other non-cognitive factors all the way from early childhood up through young adulthood.
Great. Thanks, Camille. So I'm getting the picture that our audience can see that we really do have a distinguished panel here of folks who are engaged with mindsets both at the theoretical level but also at the very practical level working with teachers and students. Camille, how about if you start by just giving us kind of an overview of academic mindsets. What are they? Okay,
and I'm going to draw from the consortium publication, Teaching Adolescents to Become Learners, in which we looked at the literature around several different non-cognitive factors, including academic mindsets. And there we define mindsets as the beliefs, attitudes, or ways of perceiving oneself in relation to learning and intellectual work that support academic performance. So basically, it's our attitudes and beliefs about ourselves in relation to academic work. And mindsets more broadly, outside of the context of just academic mindsets, where we would be talking about just your orientation and beliefs about yourself and kind of your schema to understand whatever place you're in. When we think about academic mindsets, then specifically we're talking about intellectual work and academic work. And in this review, we name 4 specific mindsets that are really critical to students' performance. And those include, I belong in this academic community, so a sense of belonging. I can succeed at this, the idea that this is something that if I engage in it, I will be successful. My ability and competence grow with my effort, which is very much the growth mindset idea. And the last one is, this work has value to me. So the idea of relevance and how important we think the work is that we're engaged in. And the literature is really clear that each of those things, if you believe them, you're much more likely to persist in work and do really well at a task.
So we could imagine, for example, that in a classroom, students are working on developing a particular mindset around a particular topic, but if they don't see the topic as relevant, then the work around the academic mindset is it gets a little bit tougher to accomplish.
Yeah, the more you believe any one of those four things, well, you bring up a good point, though, is like if you have conflicting mindsets, what happens? Because we know most of the research on these things has been done, people studying one particular area, so belonging or relevance and value. And we know independently that each of those things are really important for your performance and your engagement at school. There's not much research across mindsets to say, well, is one more important than the other? If you have one and not the other, what happens? That's kind of an unknown still.
Yeah. I was taken by one of the articles for this in preparation for this evening about the representatives of the British soccer team that came to Stanford, Carissa, and I think that we're talking with Carol Dweck about that they had players who didn't practice because they were good and they knew it, and that they didn't practice. But it was a new thing to me to think about mindset as being related to athletic activity, and as where I've been sort of focusing on the academic piece of it.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. You can have a mindset across many different domains. So you can have, a fixed mindset about sports ability, but a growth mindset about academic ability. And also within academics, you can have different mindsets in different subjects. So you can think that you can get better at history or English, but your math ability is fixed. And math is kind of a big one, especially in our culture.
Yeah.
That's right. I would say, these mindsets, they're about taking charge of our own selves and our own learning and driving our own present and future in whatever domain it might be. It might be in academics, it might be in sports, as you're saying. If a comedian wants to become a really funny comedian, it's about what is motivating, does that comedian have these four mindsets? Is that motivating the comedian to think deeply about how to become a better comedian, to try different things, to try different strategies, to persist in the face of setbacks, and to focus on growth over a lifetime? And these beliefs lead people to take charge over their own growth and learning, and that's what academic mindsets are about.
Yeah. And that's why they're important, because they one who has growth mindsets in academics is a person who is kind of programmed, who is then situated to become a self-directed learner, I think is what you're saying. Yeah, Carissa.
Yeah, I want to jump in on what we were talking about before with looking at these different mindsets together and what the effect is of having a combination of the different mindsets. And Dave Panescu, the co-founder of the Project for Education Research That Scales, has started doing some cluster analysis looking at the effect of having different combinations of these mindsets. So I'm actually going to do a screen share really quickly and show you a slide of kind of this just really preliminary data. So this is kind of just exploratory, but I think it's pretty interesting. So if you can see this slide here, what you're looking at is students who, in the red, those are students who have adaptive mindsets. So they both have a growth mindset about intelligence, so believe intelligence is malleable, and they're interested in school. So this is kind of related to the purpose idea. They see why school matters for their own lives. And you're looking at the percentage of students with different grade point averages. So you can see that the students who have both of these mindsets, more students are getting higher grades. So more students are getting a 4.0. And then the blue, those are students who are interested in school, but they have a fixed mindset about intelligence. So they kind of have the sense of purpose, but they think their intelligence is fixed. And you can see that they're doing a little bit better than the students who don't have either of these mindsets. So more of those students are doing well compared to the students who don't have either of these adaptive mindsets. So I think that's pretty interesting evidence that these beliefs might kind of work nicely together. When you have both, you can answer the questions, can I do it, and does it matter?
Very interesting. Camille.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking, one thing that's interesting on that slide too, thanks for sharing that, Krista, is just that it also shows that to some extent it's at the margins where things make a big difference, so that there's a bunch of people who are kind of in the middle and have not necessarily a really strong growth or a really strong fixed mindset, and that there's kind of this big cluster of people at the middle, but the folks at the far edge is so in that of the people who were, I think it was the green, was it the green color that was the adaptive mindset?
The red color is the adaptive
mindset. Oh, okay.
So the y-axis is the percentage of students that's getting that GPA. So about over 40% of students are getting like a 3.5. It looks like. So just to clarify what that means.
Can you do the screen share again? I'm not seeing it again. There.
Oh, sorry. There we go.
There it is.
So I'll just say that again. So you can see, so the y-axis is the percentage of students that is receiving a certain GPA, and that GPA is on the x-axis. So you can see that over 40% of students with both a growth mindset and who find school interesting, they're getting about a 3.5. And far fewer of them are getting these really low GPAs. So only about 10% of students with with both adaptive mindsets are getting a GPA of a 1. But many more students who have a fixed mindset and don't find school interesting are getting these lower GPAs.
Yeah. So that, and I guess my point was just that I think sometimes people kind of imagine it at the extremes, like the only ones getting A's are people with a really strong growth mindset, and if you don't have a growth mindset, you're getting really low grades. But obviously there's distributions across all of these across all of these things. Although this shows you certainly have the advantage of having an adaptive mindset.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Yeah.
Right, and in this case, the whole curve is shifting to the right.
Yeah.
And obviously, there's a ceiling, which is the 4 point whatever it is, so people can't go over that. But so there's a question of there's something that's being measured here, GPA, but with academic minds, which is important and it's the best predictor of success in the future. But with academic mindsets, the students do better in academics, but they also do better in a lot of other things. They do better in school, but also in college, in career, in life, because they're driving themselves. So they are doing things with a purpose. They set goals and they go after those goals, and that best prepares them to succeed not only in school, but also outside of school and beyond school.
So you're suggesting that there's a relation between academic mindsets and such things as social emotional competency, for example, and things of that nature.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so in social emotional learning, one of the components is self-management, which is very related to these issues that we're talking about. So there's certainly some overlap with SEL, but GPA is a better predictor than test scores, as Camille writes about in that wonderful research report that I recommend to everybody, by the way. GPA is a better predictor of college success than standardized test scores, and so when students develop these academic mindsets, when they encounter challenges, they see it as a learning opportunity. They don't withdraw as students do who have negative non-adaptive mindsets.
Yeah. Oftentimes, if we think about a lot of students might have a lot of other skills or abilities or strategies that they can choose to exercise or not exercise. So for example, students might have strategies that they could apply when they study that's going to make them more effective at studying, or they might have strategies in terms of interpersonal skills to get along. But oftentimes it's optional whether we choose to kind of exhibit or employ those strategies or those skills. And that one of the things that mindsets, positive mindsets, do is it makes us more likely to use those and draw upon those other strategies to be effective in school. And so it's because we care, we care about doing well, and then we can draw upon these other resources. And oftentimes kids have access to those other resources, but if they don't care, they don't bother to pull them in, or if they don't believe they belong or don't feel they can succeed. It's usually not, I don't like to use the term don't care, but like if they don't feel it's relevant, if they don't feel a sense of belonging, then they're less likely to draw on those other things to do well.
Yeah. Of course, we have lots of educators in our audience, I think, and I think what we're saying here, in a sense, what I'm gathering from this is that mindsets. Number one, mindsets are not immutable. They can change, and that in fact, this makes the educator, the teacher, a very important person. So I'm wondering if you guys would talk a little bit about your work with educators, and what can teachers do to foster a kind of growth mindset in their own context.
Yeah, I think so what's interesting, and I think Camille points this out in her paper, is that while there's a lot of research showing that these mindsets are really important, and there's a lot of causal research showing that when you change these mindsets, when you teach students to have an adaptive mindset, they do better in school. There's actually not as much causal research looking at classroom practices, so that's kind of just an area that we're beginning to explore. But there is research, I think, that's relevant for teachers that is causal. So for example, the work on praise. So when you praise students for the process, then you're kind of saying that what I care about is hard work, and what makes somebody good at something is working hard. And when you praise students for their intelligence, you're kind of sending the message that this thing that we're testing you on is some innate ability.
Yeah.
And relatedly, there's been some new work on encouragement. So what do you say to students when they're working through a problem, when they're struggling? Do you just tell them to just keep trying harder? And I think what's interesting about that is that actually could sound like a growth mindset message, to try harder, because you're talking about the process. But when students don't understand why they should try harder, that's not really meaningful. So explaining that they're growing their brain, challenging themselves is really how you become smarter. That's actually more effective than just exhorting them to try hard. So there's interesting research about different things that teachers can say in certain situations that I think is relevant to classroom practices, even though teacher interventions are kind of just starting to be researched.
Yeah.
So I think these academic mindsets are beliefs that students hold, right? Like I can develop my abilities and competencies, or this work is relevant and valuable to me. I belong to a learning community. I can succeed. These are beliefs that students have. So as teachers, I think we can reflect on how can we develop these beliefs in students, like either individually when we are interacting with an unmotivated learner, we can figure out which one of these beliefs do they lack, and how do I develop that beliefs in students? Or systemically, you can think about what kind of culture and environment can we have in our schools, and how can we teach this to kids so that they learn it and develop these beliefs in a genuine way. And kids and any human being, one of the ways that we learn beliefs is by observing the world, by observing other people, and by making inferences about how other people see the world and themselves, and what kinds of values the communities that they belong to have. And so for us at Mindset Works, it's really important to help teachers create a culture that is cohesive, where all the adults know these mindsets deeply, they hold them themselves, and they have aligned with one another on what kinds of practices foster these beliefs in students. Like take, for example, grading is one thing that can foster fixed mindsets in students or growth mindsets in students. So aligning on how do we think about grades as teachers? What do students think about grades? What do we want them to think about grades? How do we get them there? When do we use grades? When we do not use grades? How do we grade? And how do we give students feedback? Or Carissa was talking about language. What language will we use? And what will that mean? You know, are we going to work to develop the meaning of the language that we use in ourselves and our students, so that when we use that language on a daily basis, everybody has a deep understanding of that? What kinds of how will we frame lessons, or what kinds of things will we have around our walls, and what kinds of beliefs do we have as teachers? If we are in a school in which a lot of teachers feel like there are math people and there are people who are not math people, it doesn't matter what they're saying. Students are going to observe that these teachers think that math is a fixed ability. Yeah. And so we need to do some hard work to develop these mindsets in ourselves and to align with one another to live this on a daily basis.
How might, any of you, how might a faculty in a school go about working on their own mindsets or doing some sharing around that? How would we go about that?
I think one thing that's really interesting to do is to just kind of as a first step, just notice the kinds of thoughts that you have. So this is something that Carol Dweck has been talking about a lot that I think is really useful. If you everyone has fixed mindset thoughts sometimes. You know, even all of us have fixed mindset thoughts sometimes, and all of us have growth mindset thoughts sometimes. And to just realize when you're having fixed mindset thoughts, and how can you replace those with growth mindset thoughts. So as a first step, just kind of noticing what you're thinking. I think that can be really enlightening.
And I think it's helpful too to think about yourself as a learner. I don't think kids, teenagers or younger kids are really a whole lot different than adults in terms of what motivates them and what engages them in learning. And so thinking about what learning experiences have you as an adult had that have been really engaging to you, or when have you worked really hard at something and what made you work hard at it? And if we think about the conditions that supported our learning or supported our hard work and engagement, and then think, well, what am I doing to create those kinds of things for students is a good thing to reflect on.
Well, that's great. I love that because it has to do with, because when the adults are sharing stories with each other, they're building a community, a kind of a support community, and that they're also working at an exercise that they can then turn and do. They're experiencing an exercise that they can then turn and do with their kids.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I couldn't agree more with what Ed was saying earlier in terms of what teachers can do in the classroom. And I think that there's oftentimes, it's interesting because in the research that there's a lot of attention paid to how do we give students these mindsets or give particular message, it's the messaging around mindsets that really help move kids' beliefs. But I think that, and I agree with that, I think that that's really important, but I think it's one step of a two-step process, and that it's also really important to create the kind of environment that you back up what you say. And so as Ed was saying about grading, if you're trying to get students to believe that they can succeed or that their ability and competence will grow with their effort, but then you grade everything that they do and you don't really give them the opportunity to develop expertise before they demonstrate what they are able to do, then that just goes against your words about anybody can do this, or that you can get better at this. And so I think that's another really important thing for teachers to think about, is in what way are the kind of policies and systems and structures and ways they go about business in the class. How do they either justify the mindsets you're trying to get kids to develop or work against those?
I think also, Rob.
I remember 15 years ago, we imported. Yes.
Sorry, no, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I just remember when we started High Tech High years ago, we imported some language from Deborah Meyer's school, Central Park East, in Harlem, around habits of mind. And we the faculty agreed that we would adopt those habits of mind and attempt to foster them. And I came into the school, one of the original high-tech high, about 3 weeks later, and walked into a classroom where a teacher who had talked about 2 of those habits of mine and was saying there will be a quiz on these on Friday. And I was thinking, no, well, no, that's not really, that's not what we really were after around high-tech. Although it is important to name them, to name the qualities that you're after. But it's also important to model them and to catch kids engaged in them. And to celebrate the events where kids are exercising academic mindsets or habits of mind, as the case may be.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I think that it's important to name them. I think when we are learning anything, we need a combination of explicit language and sense making, as well as experiences. So sometimes we might kind of get the impression that if the kids will just develop this or cultivate this through osmosis, just through experiences and not being explicit and clear about why these things are important and what they mean and when we're living them and when we're not. But it is really important in order to generate deeper learning, to do both that explicit discussion and reflection, as well as create that environment and experiences that together lead to the deeper learning.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. So, you want to explain to students, right, that when you struggle, that's when you're really learning. You want to kind of create a culture where you're, championing productive struggle, and students understand why that's important. It's important because that's when you learn the most. It's good to make mistakes, but I would be careful about being kind of too explicit and saying, that this is a fixed mindset, this is a growth mindset, and we want you to have a growth mindset because, as we all know, students don't really like to be told what to do. And so if you can explain that the kind of mechanism behind it, that the brain is actually really malleable, scientists have discovered this new thing that might be really useful for you, that when you learn new things, your brain forms new connections. And the way that you do that is you have to try hard things. You have to push yourself. So you want to grow this part of your brain for doing really hard math problems, and if you want to do that, then you have to push yourself past the point where you're usually comfortable. So I think being explicit in that way is really important, but with a combination of being careful to not make it seem like you're pushing kids to think in a certain way.
Yeah, or to be doctrinaire about it or whatever. We have to balance. I guess I think you're saying, Chris, you sort of need to balance your interest in fostering a growth mindset with your kind of acceptance and honoring of where students are, and kind of moving with them, and it's kind of a shared purpose kind of way to move forward.
Right, and let them come to that idea kind of on their own, so that they're kind of fostering it in themselves. Yeah,
great. Camille, you were going to say something, I think.
Nope, I wasn't. I was just reading a little chat on the side here.
Okay.
So we do have a few questions from the audience that I'll just throw out if anybody wants to address them. One is about different mindset assessment tools, and I posted a few different resources from MindsetWorks, but I'm wondering if anybody else has mindset assessment tools that you'd recommend.
So I'll just say that we've been in a multi-year process of developing a student survey instrument that includes my academic mindsets as well as many other non-cognitive factors that affect student learning, and that is we're just about to do our second wave of data collection on that, but it's if people are interested in participating in that, they can send me an email, and we can try to include their school in the administration of that survey.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just add also that the assessments and measures are a big need for the field, and we are working hard, and Camille's working hard, and other people are really working hard to develop assessments. Right now, the assessments of academic mindsets, which are beliefs, are the ones that are available are instruments that are meant to be done relatively infrequently. Like, for example, before you do an effort with students and afterwards. And if you try to do it frequently, if you do it as a high stakes issue, like something that's going to influence students' grades or is going to get them in trouble, it's going to be really easy for them to game it and just to learn what they're supposed to answer. So the approach that we take and that we encourage educators to take, and one of the ways to see how students are progressing in these mindsets is to have students use some mindset rubrics and self-assess themselves on how they're doing around different dimensions, and kind of walk themselves through, okay, here's where I'm doing on taking constructive criticism and learning from it, or here's how I am responding to challenges and in a resilient way, etc. And that's used as a tool for the student to manage themselves in their learning process and their growth over time, something that they can use forever, can lead to a lot of information for the student, as well as good information for the teacher to know where the students are. And we have some of those rubrics also on our website. I can send them to Karen to post, or they're at mindsetworks.com/free-resources. There's some rubrics there.
Cool.
I think
Thanks.
that's a really great point about giving these kinds of measures multiple times. And even if you're just giving it pre-post, when students complete the mindset survey more than once, they tend to look like they have more of a growth mindset. So if you give the growth mindset survey once and then you do some effort and you give it again, it might falsely look like they've gotten to have more of a growth mindset. So we actually only use the measure in that way when we're looking at two different groups. So did one group become more growth mindset than the other group? Because they'll both become more growth mindset.
So at the end of after they've been exposed to some kind of treatment. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and it's always in a randomized controlled trial, because we know that all students will become more growth.
Mm-hmm.
We've been talking a lot about at High Tech High about our approach to learning, the development of 21st century skills, and so on. And some people have looked at that kind of approach and called it Learning 2.0. Which raises the question, what is Assessment 2.0? And to me, it seems that Assessment 2.0 is dialogical, and that the prompts that Ed is talking about are the occasions for dialogue, because the student may self-assess, but the teacher's been observing, or peers have been observing. So there's an occasion for dialogue there, and conversation about moving forward, rather than simply a point-in-time rating or something of that nature. It's an ongoing process of dialogue, I think.
I agree. Yeah, and also the teacher can have more expertise than the student, so the student might not know how to have developed the expertise to really know, what to do. So in some cases, this happens where student and teacher come together on a weekly basis or every 2 or 3 weeks and set goals. Okay, I'm going to work on my resiliency, or I'm going to work on using this particular strategy. And I agree that dialogue is really powerful.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if either of you have any experience or research around the idea of building up mindsets to transfer to a different context. And so it's unclear. A lot of the research is within a particular context. So like when students enter middle school and then followed through the end of middle school, or when they enter college and follow them through the end of college. But none that I know of that follows students, out of one school across a transition into another school, and see if mindsets carry over in that new context. And my kind of hypothesis about this is that if you, as you were both just talking about, make it explicit what a mindset is, when you see it being the student exercising it, help to kind of name it, and then be explicit also about when you go to this new context, this way of thinking about it is going to help you there. Like, that seems to me that would help, but I don't know of any research that's looked at that specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if work you've done, what your thoughts, Carissa or Ed, what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so I don't know of any work that looked at that either, and typically when we do design these programs, we don't name them. We just present the evidence about the malleability of the brain. So certainly, I can't speak to being explicit in how that would transfer to new situations. But I think that's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, I would agree, and I also, I don't know of research on that. I would say that we believe that the best time to do this type of intervention or work to develop mindsets, or one particularly great time, is during transition periods when kids are entering a new environment, like for example a new school or the beginning of a new school year. But a new school, like the beginning of 6th grade or the beginning of 9th grade, is a great opportunity to do this because kids are coming into a new world and they're trying to figure out how that world works and what will make them successful in that world. So their mindsets are particularly vulnerable, positive and negative, in that transition period. So if you do a lot of work in middle school to build mindsets in students, and then when they go to high school, it's not cool to engage in learning activities, and everybody gets labeled, and everybody has a fixed mindset about abilities. That is a particularly vulnerable opportunity for students to lose the mindsets that they developed in middle school. And similarly, if they didn't have a cohesive environment in middle school, it's also an opportunity to build positive mindsets through a cohesive environment. I would agree with the hypothesis that Camille presented, which is if we help students understand this more deeply, then they can be more resilient when they go into these new environments. So if they learn this in high school or middle school and they go to college and they're more on their own, we see them being more resilient in college, and I think that's part of it, is if they have a deeper understanding of these mindsets and they can name when they're in a fixed mindset and they know what strategies they can use, then we believe that will make them more resilient and more effective as well. But I agree that the research is not there yet.
I think the point about these mindsets mattering a lot during challenging transitions is really interesting for a number of reasons. So all of the reasons that you brought up, Ed, I think those are all reasons why mindsets are important during challenges, but also, or during transitions, but also just the fact that transitions are hard. So when these mindsets matter the most when things are hard. So even just in a really hard class. So for example, there was a study that looked at students in organic chemistry. Obviously, all those students have ability, right? They're taking organic chemistry. But it was the students with the growth mindset that ended up doing better in that class because it's a really hard class and your ability isn't just going to take you there in a class like organic chemistry. It's really the way that you're going to respond to challenges. And similarly with something like purpose. When things are really hard, it might be harder for you to remember, why am I doing this? This is so hard. And if you can remember your reasons for caring about school or for going to school in the first place, that can be really powerful during the toughest times. Similarly, belonging, when you're encountering a new transition, you're just going to be more likely to question your belonging. And it's especially true for minority students or for women in the STEM field who see that there aren't many other people like them. And so there's just a lot of things going on during transitions that make them really challenging and that make these mindsets especially important.
Yeah. You're taking me back, Carissa, to a moment when I was trapped in a particularly fixed mindset that was taking organic chemistry in college. I cruised through the first semester of chemistry because it was a rehash of what I'd had in high school and did very well in, and I hit organic, and I just shut down because I couldn't imagine I couldn't visualize these models and so on. But there was a kid in that class who was young, going in college, and who asked all these questions, and it was like he didn't know anything, but he asked questions. And he's now a world-renowned chemist. So I was thinking, oh man, it just takes me back. It was a bad period in my life as a student.
That's such a great story, because what you said about asking questions is so important. So the reason that these mindsets matter is because students approach school and learning in really different ways based on the mindset that they have. So for students who have a fixed mindset, their goal in the classroom is to just look smart. So they'll be afraid to ask questions because they want to preserve this idea that they're smart.
If you ask a question, you might look dumb. Yeah.
Exactly, or hide the fact that you're dumb. But if you have a growth mindset, then the way that you become smarter is the only way to do that is by learning. And so, of course, you have to ask questions because you know that's how you learn. Similarly, with effort beliefs, effort is the way you learn, the way you become smarter in a growth mindset. But in a fixed mindset, it's a sign that you don't have the ability, because if you were smart, you wouldn't have to try.
So honoring questions and fostering questions could be a really useful thing for a teacher to do in a classroom, and to build a culture where it's smart to ask questions.
Mm-hmm. There's another strategy I think that teachers have used is the idea of sharing your failures. So like, how did you get it wrong and why did you get it wrong, and who can come up with a really great, way you screwed this up, and let's talk about what you were thinking, and if that becomes something that's celebrated and shared and funny, then and not like shameful that you didn't have the right answer, then it can help people take more intellectual risks when, hey, what do you got to lose?
James G. of the University of Arizona visited iTech one time, and he walked across the courtyard where some kids were trying to get a helicopter that they had built to lift, and they failed. And he stood and watched them, and they failed. And they started talking about what went wrong and so on. And they tried again, and they failed again. They tried 5 times, and they finally got it up on the 5th time. And he went up to him and he said, that was really fabulous. And they were all embarrassed that it had taken them 5 times. And he said, oh, no. I've learned much more about what you know by watching you fail and deal with failure than I would have if you had lifted it off the first time.
Yeah, I think the idea of kind of champion mistakes is a really interesting one. So we're actually working on a teacher intervention with Joe Bowler and Greg Walton for math teachers, where we're trying to get them to promote a growth mindset and value mistakes in the classroom. And one idea that we've talked about is this idea of kind of your favorite mistake, right? So a teacher will look at the homework and find their favorite mistake and put it on the board and explain that, when you make, not like an error, but when you make like a conceptual mistake, that's kind of how you learn. You have these insights when you make mistakes. And you actually have brain activity when you make mistakes that you wouldn't have if you were just getting all the answers right. And in math, that's a lot of students come to think that the goal is to just get everything right, but it really should be to struggle on something and deeply understand it.
And Carissa,
sorry, go ahead, Camille.
Oh no, I was just going to say, Carissa, when you talked about brain activity, and then I also wanted to make a comment back to Rob's chemistry example in his own experience, and that much of the research around mindsets, it goes back 20 plus years, and a lot of that was initially just kind of correlational research, and then some kind of like in the lab kind of work. And more recently, there's been a lot of intervention research, like if we change this thing, do we get the outcome we thought, which starts to look much more causally. But there's also a lot of brain imaging research now that also is backing up the idea of mindsets, and particularly if the idea, you said that you were following it along and then all of a sudden you got confused about it, like I don't understand what's going on, that what happens at that point in time is really the thinking and cognitive processing part of your brain shuts down, and you start getting into the like freaking out part of your brain, kind of social emotional processing, and it's literally impossible to think and learn when that activity is going on. And so there's a lot of brain imaging research now that kind of backs up and shows some of the mechanisms whereby some of our beliefs and attitudes really have an actual physical impact on our ability to learn and process.
Yeah.
Right. There's that really cool study where they brought students into the lab and they asked them like trivia questions and they were measuring their brain activation. I think maybe this is what you're referring to. And the students all students, they had lots of brain activity when they were told whether or not they got the answer right or wrong. So students with the growth mindset and with the fixed mindset both wanted to know whether or not they got the answer right. But then they told the students the correct answer. And the students with the growth mindset had a lot more brain activity than the students with the fixed mindset, suggesting that the fixed mindset students only cared if they got it right or wrong. They weren't as interested in learning what the correct answer was. And so they gave kind of a pop quiz at the end of this lab study where they asked the same trivia questions that the students already got. And not surprisingly, the growth mindset students did better. It makes sense because they were interested in learning what the correct answers were.
Yeah.
You know, I was thinking of actually one that it was, I think it was MIT or somewhere. It was someplace where you have to be good at math to be there anyway, and it was women in an MRI machine. And if you, in every case, they said, you know, we want to see we just want to know what's happening in the brain when people think about math. So we're going to give you a math problem, just like think about math. It doesn't matter if you get it right or wrong, but just, you know, try and think about what the answer is. And then, you know, if you want to call out the answer, great. But then they said to, you know, half the people, it was all women in it, but they said to half the people, you know, it might be more challenging because, you know, women aren't as good at math or something like that.
Yeah.
And for that group, when they asked math questions, they started, you know, and they knew math. They were good math. Yeah, they started like freaking out about, okay, what if I get this wrong? They're going to think, you know, this kind of stereotype confirmation thing. And not only did they see significantly different brain activity when they kind of invoked that stereotype, but in fact, the other group got way more of the questions right, than the ones who were worried about.
That is really interesting. It's one of the main mechanisms for some of these mindsets, like you know, for in stereotype threat studies, and I think this might be true in belonging, is just that when students are under threat, they just have less cognitive resources available to focus on academics. And so the reason why changing these beliefs, even though it seems small, can have a really big impact is because you're just allowing them to perform to their full potential. And before, they were kind of being stifled by these worries.
Right.
Well, I think that's definitely a huge part of it, is kind of the fight or flight emotional flooding. Reduces the cognitive capacity, but I think there's also kind of the positive leaning in benefits of these academic mindsets, which is that if you have a more genuine intrinsic motivation in what you're doing, you're going to be thinking about it more deeply. So you're going to be asking questions, whether verbally or inside yourself, trying to figure out where you're confused, trying to your brain is going to be working a lot harder. And I think, you know, the greatest resource that we have to improve anybody's learning is the learner's brain, because that's where learning happens. So if there's more activity in the brain that is focused on learning, then learning is going to be deeper. And I think that is a key reason why these academic mindsets are so powerful, is because they lead the brain to focus on that zone of proximal development and figure out how can we continue to grow and learn over time.
Yeah, and I think that point is really well taken, and it's because academic mindsets allow students to engage more deeply in learning and then experience success in learning that they get reinforced and eventually over time become kind of incorporated as an identity thing. You know, so it's not just like I'm thinking this in this one room or in this one instance, but over time they start building up this cumulative experience of developing competence and being successful, and that then kind of protects them against difficult stuff because they have that experience to draw upon. So if it was just the mindset, I don't know that you would get that becoming the identity thing, but I think it's because the mindset allows you to do good work and then to have that experience of good work and that history to draw from, that propels you forward and kind of protects you, becomes a protective factor.
Recursive processes that kind of David Yeager and Greg Walton talk about in their It's Not Magic paper, which is a really great resource, I think, for anyone who wants to understand the mechanisms behind why these beliefs are so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, on the identity issue, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, it's like, well, our adolescents and pre-adolescents are asking, who am I, and who am I becoming, and can I engage in this behavior and still be me? Can I do can I persist in this task even though I'm leery about it and don't think I can do it? Can I persist and still be me? And so our identity grows as we develop these mindsets as well.
Yeah,
I'm also thinking of the work of Claude Steele around stereotype threat and just how much of this is so socially mediated, and which makes it all the more important. I think you were saying, Carissa, that our classrooms be places where everyone belongs. So how about, do we have a question coming from Dlmooc?
Well, we have just about 10 minutes left, so we want to start wrapping up. But this has been a great conversation, and there's been really a lot of interesting comments in the chat. And one of them is about sort of all of this in the context of schools right now, and how much formal schooling sort of dictates how students think about learning, and how do we create a space in formal school settings for students to discover these notions of mindset. And how does this tie into all of our accountability sort of mania that's happening now, and what are some sort of thoughts or practical advice on, in today's climate, because obviously this it's a chicken and egg thing. If you have a growth mindset, you're going to do better, but there's so much focus on accountability right now that it does lead to that freaking out and just kind of the opposite. So thoughts on that maybe as we're wrapping up.
I think what's really nice about where we are in education right now is I'm really excited personally about the Common Core, because it does emphasize this deeper learning and kind of more open, rich tasks, different kinds of assessments, and those are the kinds of things that we think will foster these mindsets. And I also think it makes it easier for schools to agree that developing these adaptive academic mindsets should be a priority, because the Common Core is calling for these more rigorous standards, and if students aren't prepared to deal with challenge, they're not going to get the benefits of deeper learning that we know happen when students are challenged. So we want to both be able to challenge students and allow them to engage in this deeper learning, but we need to prepare them with the right academic mindsets to be able to do so.
I also think the Common Core opens up a good opportunity. I think that standards-based kind of grading practices, and which kind of competency-based learning practices are much more supportive of academic mindsets, because the idea is you keep working at something until you get it, and it doesn't it doesn't matter. It's not like the one-shot deal. I think the standardized tests, as they have been practiced over the last 10 and 15 years, really work against the idea of your ability and competence improve with your effort, because in fact it's really hard to change your standardized test scores. They tend to be very predictive of your next standardized test score, and so shifting over to thinking about how students can demonstrate competency over time in performance tasks and that kind of thing, as opposed to the annual test that's going to rank you relative to other people, I think is a good move. And I'm encouraged to see kind of a backlash against and frustration with standardized tests, and moving towards more performance-based kinds of assessments, I think, are more in line with the kind of mindsets that really help kids do well in school.
And I would echo that, and that the transition to Common Core is a great opportunity. I would also say that this work is doable in this context. And I want to also acknowledge that the context is not ideal and there's a lot of challenges, and everybody here is working hard to try to change that context and policy. But this work is doable today. We serve hundreds of schools every year who are doing this work, and doing this work will help students in the current policy context and in future policy context. It does take time and investment of time of teachers to learn it and to align around what practices to use on a daily basis. So it's not easy, it takes effort, but it's definitely doable. But I agree that even at a higher level, even under a Common Core context, schools are not being asked to develop learners. They're not being asked to develop learning skills and dispositions in kids. They're being asked to teach kids things. In the past it was more facts or procedures. Now it's critical thinking skills, which are important. All of that is important, but it's still not learning to learn and taking ownership over their learning. But that is work that we have to do in order to succeed in teaching kids all those things and in preparing them for their future. So I think it's something we have to do. It's not easy, but it is definitely doable. And it'll be more and more doable as we transition into these new worlds of Common Core. The Common Core creates conditions where this is even, can be done in a richer way. And even, I think more importantly, is we're all going to be doing a lot of work to transition into something. And it's a great opportunity to rethink how do we design our schools to deliver to kids everything that they need. And so it's a great time for us to be thinking about this and to be aligning with our colleagues around how we want to run our schools.
I'm all for standards and all against standardization. So I do maintain some worries about the Common Core. I love the standards, but I worry about what's going to happen when we test for those standards. But I do think that, one of the pernicious effects of the testing mania has been to it has seeped into our schools so that many events inside our schools, I think this is what you're referring to, Ed, in a way, when you say we can do it in the current context, in many of our schools, events that should not be accountability events become accountability events because of this pressure that we feel around the test. For example, if students are keeping journals, they're doing writing, they're writing every day, and then we hear teachers say, every piece that you write is going to be assessed. But those pieces of writing should not be accountability events. They should be purposive events, that every piece that you write has a purpose and will go into an archive for future use and so forth. So I do think that there are, it's horribly abstract, but I do think that there are ways to turn the conversation, the daily conversation in schools, away from accountability and towards purpose, which will lead us back to that broader accountability in the end, in the way that you're talking about it. I see we have about 3 minutes before we have to wrap up. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So let's just go around and for final thoughts, and then we'll close it off.
Well, I'll say this was a lot of fun. Thank you, Rob and Camille and Carissa and High Tech High for organizing. And obviously, we're all very passionate about this, and we encourage you to think about academic mindsets and how you can foster them in students.
Yep. Thank you so much. I could talk about this stuff all day. I can't wait to do it again.
I agree. It's fascinating stuff, and it's an ever-evolving field. So stay tuned.
I see all kinds of opportunities for teachers to engage in action research around mindsets and dispositions and so forth. So I'm loving the notion of this kind of intersection between kind of theoretical work around mindsets and the practical work that's going on in our classrooms. I think there's all kinds of potential for a very tight intersection between in that work. And I've really loved being a part of this conversation. So thank you to all the panelists. I'm going to turn this back over to Ryan now for a second to close off and give us a couple of reminders about why we did this preview in the first place and where we're headed with it. Ryan?
Can you guys see my face? I'm not seeing my face on the chat. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Well, first of all, I just wanted to thank you guys for what a fantastic panel. So I'll give you a round of applause. A clap for you guys. You know, I feel like I feel like we're just getting into it and we have to say goodbye. But I too could listen to you guys for another hour. And I have to tell you, from the online, just listening to the kind of chat that's going on behind, it really seems like people are kind of struck by this work. So I would encourage people to close the loop and continue this conversation. It doesn't need to end here. I think that this week is really focused on academic mindsets, and just to kind of reiterate that, there's a ton of stuff online. Please feel free to join our G+ community. We will continue this conversation this Wednesday, 4 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, and so you can join in the same fashion.
I'm definitely going to be there.
Thanks, Rob.
Yeah.
Well, that's because the Red Sox aren't playing anymore, so you have some free time now, right? But we'll be dealing with kind of a practicing teacher that's implementing some of the strategies and academic mindsets. And so the math teacher, and she'll be talking about some of this feedback and the way that she's implemented academic mindsets in the verbiage in her classroom, and we'll help her through that. And I think Ed and some of our panelists will be there as well. Please make sure to tweet us at #Dlmooc. We also have a tweet of the week, which is about fixed mindset and how you've overcome that fixed mindset. Please sign up at, I'm going to do this verbally, but it's posted about 3,000 different places, but Dlmooc, DLMOOC, deeper-learning.org. So please sign up for our course, which will be starting in January. So thanks, everybody, and go enjoy your Monday Night Football.
Thanks a lot.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.